We understand that you want to qualify Walter for the Oscars, and there's a very set process. Is that right? What is that process, and what are you doing?
So we had a chance with Walter when we were getting ready to release it. We were like, well, what would it take to qualify for an Academy Award? You know, how do they decide who wins an Academy? There's got to be something you go through. So we just went online and looked at their website, and they have a very extensive list of rules for various types. If you've got a narrative feature, if you've got in our case, a documentary feature, the rules are different from what you'd need for a documentary short, or a short narrative, or a foreign film. And so we started to read through them, and as I was reading them, I'm like, well, it's not as difficult as you might think. I know that they're making it, be something that they don't want just any film, like any low-grade film that's made, kind of cast out to. But they do qualify some things that cost some money, and essentially these rules sort of change from time to time. But at the current moment, for a documentary feature, you have to screen commercially for a week in New York and Los Angeles, and these are minimum requirements. So they're definitely looking for you to do more, as much as possible with film. So when we talk about New York, they're talking about Manhattan borough. So you got to be in the big city with all the other films that come out every week. There's something like 20 plus films that are launched every week in New York, and you've got to have reviews in New York, and also reviews on the West Coast in proper newspapers like the New York Times, which becomes fairly easy to do if you have a commercial release in New York, because as of right now, it's the New York Times policy to review films that are released for a week there. I have, over the years, tried to get New York Times and various bigger periodicals to review my films, and they don't, because of this particular factor. They have so many films releasing there, and they basically review only what's released commercially. So in addition to releasing commercially on a documentary, you have to send the Academy 250 DVDs, and those go out to their nomination committees, who decide who decide ultimately what's going to be nominated. And those DVDs cannot have any artwork on them, as we found the hard way. We actually had a DVD that was designed with a for your consideration cover on it, and it's only textured, which we didn't consider art, but it was art. Ultimately, it was not just blank or not art. And so fortunately, they've been very considerate, and they're working with us at each of the stages here. And so we have a quick solution of sending some envelopes that they'll stuff for us. But it's kind of interesting to see all of these little pieces and parts. You also have to advertise in New York and LA. Very minimal requirements there, but you do have to have at least one ad in a couple of newspapers before your premieres. And you have to have a certain amount of screenings, and they have to be between a certain period of time. Those are the basic requirements to be able to qualify a film for the Academy. And of course, you send in some paperwork and sign some stuff. No money is required in order to qualify, other than making your commitment to get your film out commercially. And that's definitely, for most production companies, is a huge undertaking and costs quite a bit. I should say too that you cannot have screened your film anywhere before it goes into a theater and has its release. I believe it can have screened at film festivals, but it can't. It has to have its world premiere. It can't be commercially available, as a digital download or as a DVD before you go into theaters.
And have you looked at prior, I'm thinking of Innocente, I think was that last year's?
Yeah,
it was. I just saw the trailer and it looked amazing. Yeah. But have you looked at some of the other success stories with that and tried to kind of see what they've done? Or I don't know, I'm just wondering, what kind of background research do you do before you make such a time commitment, and money, I'm sure, too?
I'm kind of a shoot from the hip guy a lot of times. I just get a hunch and I go with it. And so in this particular instance, I didn't really do a ton of research. I definitely saw other campaigns. I read about campaigns that felt like it wasn't worth the costs to nominate, or to allow a film to be considered for nomination, to qualify. we actually looked at it as it was part of our Kickstarter campaign. We wanted people to be able to help us, give us that opportunity, because besides the opportunity to be qualified, it was the opportunity to play in New York. I've never played for a week in New York, never played for a week in LA, you know, gotten to open in sort of a commercial theater in this manner. A lot of times my films are going on theatrical tours. Sometimes I'm with them. We're playing in all kinds of different places. Lots of theaters. I've definitely spent money in like outdoor towns, at big theaters like the Boulder Theater, which is very expensive to rent for one night, you know, to launch a film. But I'd never had this sort of traditional film release, and I felt after 10 years, I felt personally I deserved it. And so it was one of those moments where I said, I'm going to do it, and I want to get this film out there. It's a film that I don't think has a lot of chances of getting a nomination personally, just based on what I've seen out there that's been nominated. But I think it's a terribly important film. You know, I got a chance to spend time with these people that are incredible, and I think if people see the film for what it's supposed to be, you know, if they really get it, they'll see the way that we have sort of captured their lives and in kind of context to, you know, Sarah and my life as we come together. And I think, you know, I think that there's so many people that sort of miss the things that matter in life, and I try to, like in my films, I try to put that out there. And so when I think about what we tried to do, and I don't know if we achieved it yet because we haven't seen how it plays out, you know, it's something that personally I feel like, why not? Why can't this potentially be recognized by the Academy? You know, who judges what an Academy nominated film should be? So we figured we'd give it a shot, and we can never look back and say we didn't. And now we know the process, and it's not that scary, but it's expensive. I mean, I guess you're going to sink, if you go for the very minimum, which I think that they prefer you to do more than the very minimum, I mean, you're going to sink probably $25,000 at least into it, which is, you know, where we hit with Kickstarter, interestingly enough. But if you want to really support your launch, and you're going to open commercially in New York and LA and potentially other theaters, I mean, you really want to probably be thinking like $50,000 to $75,000, you know, depending on who you need to hire or how much you can or can't handle. Publicists, for example, they're not cheap, and we try to do a lot of our own publicity in different ways. But you know, for this release of Walter, we went ahead and hired a publicist, and I started calling around and trying to get publicists to consider the film, and it was difficult. You know, there was a lot of the New York-based publicists that you hear about and you meet when you go to places like conferences like South by Southwest, and they won't even consider, you know, your films because they've never heard of you, or you're too small or whatnot. But those that do, like, I mean, they'll quote you like $4,000 or $5,000 for a release in New York, and then, you know, a few more $1,000s for the release in LA. You know, I mean, you're looking at you know, that kind of money for a few weeks of someone's time to ultimately go out and push your film to the press. And it sounds like a lot of money, but if you don't work with those types of people, and you work with somebody who's a lot lesser, they don't necessarily have those types of connections to where they can make a phone call to somebody at the New York Times that they sort of know, so they know they can ultimately maybe get, you know, some favorable press for your film. That being said, you never know. Like, you can spend all that money and get nothing. We decided to go for someone who was in the heart of the documentary world in New York. She works very closely with Stranger Than Fiction doc-series by Tom Powers and Doc NYC Film Festival, and so she really had a lot of connections and kind of helped us build a grassroots game out there, and it was just a really great personality, a really wonderful person, and she's worked very hard on the film, but I don't think she has yet quite those really big powerhouse connections, which in a way we kind of liked because that's where we're at. She just matched who we were. She matched the way we feel about things, and when you can be okay with that, be at peace with that, and not worry too much that you're not necessarily going to get the, you know, hundreds of huge articles or whatever, you know, you kind of let it be. But it's always a little tough because you're spending quite a bit of money on PR and you don't really know what it's going to do for you.